The only thing colder than the champagne was my fiancée's smile when she spotted her ex across the reception hall. I'm Kyle Foster, 35 years old, and I should have seen this disaster coming from the moment Clarissa Lane said, "I do," with all the enthusiasm of someone ordering a root canal. "Kyle, honey, could you handle the cake-cutting photos? I need to powder my nose." Clarissa's voice had that particular pitch that meant trouble. After 3 years together, I knew her tells better than a poker dealer knows marked cards. The Riverside Manor Hotel buzzed with 200 guests who'd driven from 3 states to watch what was rapidly becoming the social equivalent of the Hindenburg. Crystal chandeliers cast everything in that golden light that wedding photographers love and divorce lawyers see in their sleep. The cake, 3 tiers of vanilla fondant that cost more than my monthly truck payment, sat waiting like a prop in a play nobody wanted to perform. "Sure thing, sweetheart." I watched her glide toward the bathroom in her $8,000 dress, but she took a hard left toward the bar where Trent Collins nursed a whiskey neat. Trent, her ex-boyfriend from college, the guy who sold insurance policies like snake oil and drove a chrome-wrapped BMW that screamed, "compensating for something." My best man, Eddie Martinez, appeared at my elbow, loosening his tie. "Dude, your bride just disappeared with Captain Slick over there. Want me to go drag her back?" "Let it play out," I said, though my jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. "Rope, meet neck." The photographer, a nervous kid named Marcus, who kept adjusting his vintage camera strap, hovered nearby. "Mr. Foster? Should we wait for Mrs. Foster to return?" Mrs. Foster. The title felt like a joke that hadn't landed yet. "Give her 10 minutes, I said, grabbing a beer from the nearest table. The bottle was sweating in the humid reception hall air, and I pressed it against my forehead. If she's not back, we'll improvise. 10 minutes became 20. 20 became 40. The cake sat there like a monument to my stupidity while guests started whispering behind champagne flutes and cocktail napkins. Mrs. Lane, Clarissa's mother, materialized beside me in a cloud of expensive perfume and barely concealed hostility. She'd made it clear from day one that her precious daughter was settling for a construction project manager when she could have landed a doctor or lawyer. "Kyle, where is Clarissa? The photographer is getting impatient, and Aunt Margaret needs to leave by 8. "Your daughter stepped out with her ex-boyfriend about an hour ago," I said, not bothering to soften the blow. "Maybe they are discussing old times." Her face went through several color changes before settling on mortified pink. "That's impossible. Clarissa wouldn't what? Disappear during her own wedding reception? Because I'm looking at an empty spot where my wife should be standing." The catering staff had started cleaning tables, stacking plates with the efficiency of people who'd seen every possible wedding disaster. I flagged down Maria, the head server who'd been working events at Riverside Manor for 15 years. "Maria, did you see which way the bride went about an hour ago?" She glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "Mr. Foster, I probably shouldn't say anything, but I saw Mrs. Foster leave through the side exit with that gentleman in the gray suit. They got into his car." "What time exactly?" "Right after the father-daughter dance. Maybe 7:30? It was now 9:15. 2 hours. My wife had been gone for 2 hours from her own wedding reception, and I was standing here like an idiot holding a beer and making small talk with caterers. Eddie reappeared with Stephanie Walsh, Clarissa's maid of honor and the kind of woman who collected gossip like some people collected stamps. Stephanie's face was flushed, whether from champagne or excitement was anybody's guess. "Kyle, I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation," Stephanie said, but her eyes were bright with the thrill of being adjacent to scandal. "Maybe Trent had some kind of emergency." "What kind of emergency requires my wife?" I asked. "Did his insurance license expire? Did someone need urgent help selecting a deductible?" The photographer kid cleared his throat. "Mr. Foster, should I start packing up the equipment?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. From Clarissa's phone, but the tone was all wrong. "Kyle, something came up with Trent. Family emergency. Don't wait up. We'll explain later. See family emergency." Trent Collins was an only child whose parents lived in Florida. His biggest family crisis was usually deciding which country club to join. I showed the message to Eddie, who read it twice and whistled low. "Dude, that's not even how she texts. Clarissa uses more emojis than a teenager." He was right. Clarissa's normal texts looked like hieroglyphic explosions. This message was clean, efficient, and absolutely not written by my wife. The reception was officially dying. Guests were making polite excuses and heading for the exits. The band had stopped playing and started packing instruments. Even the bartender was giving me sympathetic looks while he counted bottles. I walked to the bridal suite where Clarissa had gotten ready, hoping to find some clue about what the hell was happening. The room was exactly as she'd left it. Makeup scattered across the vanity, her street clothes folded neatly on the bed, her purse sitting open on the nightstand. Her purse, with her phone inside. I stared at the iPhone in its rhinestone case, the same phone that had supposedly sent me that text message 20 minutes ago. The screen was locked, but I knew her passcode, our anniversary date, because Clarissa wasn't creative with security. The text thread showed our conversation from earlier in the day, but nothing about Trent or family emergencies. The last message was from me at 6 p.m. You look beautiful. See you at the altar. Her response, love you too. Can't wait to be Mrs. Foster. Emojis and all. So who had sent that text from a different phone? And why was my wife's actual phone sitting here like evidence at a crime scene? I scrolled through her recent calls. 3 calls to Trent Collins in the past week. 2 calls to someone named G. Reddick yesterday. G. Reddick. That was Genevieve Reddick, wife of my boss, Mark Reddick, VP of Midwest Construction Solutions. Why was my wife calling my boss's wife the day before our wedding? The door opened behind me. I turned, expecting Clarissa, but found Genevieve Reddick herself. She was 38, elegant in the way that money and good genetics could achieve, wearing a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. Kyle, I heard there was some kind of situation. Situation, I laughed, but there was no humor in it. My wife disappeared with her ex-boyfriend during our reception. I'd call that more than a situation. Genevieve closed the door behind her and sat down in the chair by the window. Her expression was careful, controlled. I think we need to talk. Talk about what? I asked, though something in Genevieve's tone made my stomach clench. This woman didn't make social calls, especially not to her husband's employees at their wedding receptions. About why Clarissa called me yesterday, and about what Trent Collins really does for a living. She crossed her legs and fixed me with a stare that could have cut glass. Kyle, how much do you know about your wife's work at Consolidated Insurance? She's an adjuster. She investigates claims, determines payouts. Pretty standard stuff. But even as I said it, pieces were clicking together in my head, like puzzle pieces from hell. Clarissa processes more high-value claims than any adjuster in the Midwest. Convenient accidents, mysterious thefts, perfectly timed disasters. Always just under the threshold that would trigger federal investigation. The hotel room felt like it was shrinking. What are you saying? I'm saying your wife and Trent Collins have been running insurance fraud for 2 years. Small scale, smart, almost impossible to detect unless you know what to look for. Genevieve opened her purse and pulled out a manila folder. My husband Mark has been laundering their profits through construction contracts. Inflated material costs, phantom labor charges, the works. I stared at the documents she handed me. Bank statements, email printouts, photographs of damage claims that looked suspiciously similar. How do you know all this? Because I've been investigating my own husband for 6 months. Mark thinks I'm a trophy wife who spends her days at the country club. In reality, I have a forensic accounting degree and a very good private investigator. The wedding reception was happening in another universe now. My reality had narrowed to this hotel room, these documents, and the growing certainty that my entire life had been built on lies. So where does that leave me? I asked, holding a bag full of nothing while they disappear with $2 million in fraudulent payouts. Genevieve stood up and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. Unless you want to do something about it. Like what? She turned back to me with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Like taking that prepaid honeymoon to Barbados and giving them something to really worry about. 3 days later, I was sitting on a beach chair at the Sandy Lane Resort, watching Genevieve Reddick emerge from crystal blue water in a white bikini that probably cost more than my monthly salary. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was on my honeymoon with my boss's wife, while my actual wife was presumably counting stolen money somewhere with her ex-boyfriend. This is insane, I said as Genevieve settled into the chair next to mine. I should be home, calling lawyers, figuring out how to get my money back. Your money? She laughed and signaled the beach attendant for drinks. Kyle, everything you owned just became evidence in a federal fraud investigation. Your joint accounts, your house, your truck, all of it's going to be frozen while the FBI sorts out what belongs to whom. The beach attendant brought us piña coladas in coconut shells. The drinks were ridiculous, tropical, and exactly what someone on their honeymoon should be drinking. The absurdity of the situation was starting to hit me. So, what's your plan? I asked. We sit here drinking cocktails while our spouses steal millions? We document everything. Genevieve pulled out her phone and held it up for a selfie. Say cheese, Kyle. We're about to become very famous. The photo was perfect. 2 attractive people in paradise, sun-kissed and laughing, looking like the happiest couple on earth. She posted it immediately to Instagram with the location tagged, Sandy Lane Resort, Barbados. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. Paradise, check, new beginnings, Ajar blessed. Are you crazy? Mark will see that. That's the point. So will Clarissa, Trent, and everyone else in our little social circle back home. Her fingers flew over the phone screen, posting to Facebook, Twitter, even LinkedIn. By tomorrow morning, half the Midwest will know that Kyle Foster is in paradise with Genevieve Reddick while his bride is missing in action. My phone started buzzing immediately. Text messages, missed calls, social media notifications. Eddie was calling every 30 seconds. Mrs. Lane had sent 17 text messages, each more hysterical than the last. This is going to destroy both our reputations, I said. Good. Reputations are overrated. Results are what matter. Genevieve ordered another round of drinks. Kyle, in 48 hours, we're going to be the most talked about people in 3 states. Every news outlet, every gossip blog, every social media influencer is going to want our story. And then what? Then Clarissa and Trent are going to panic. They're going to make mistakes. And when they do, we're going to be ready. She was right about the attention. By the second day, our Instagram posts had 5,000 shares. A local news station back home had picked up the story. Bride disappears at reception, groom honeymoons with boss's wife. The comments section was a dumpster fire of speculation, judgment, and amateur detective work. But something else was happening too. I was actually enjoying myself. Genevieve was smart, funny, and had the kind of dark sense of humor that came from years of living with a man she couldn't trust. She knew about wine, could speak 3 languages, and had opinions about everything from architecture to international finance. You know what's funny? I said on our 3rd evening, watching the sunset from our suite's balcony. I haven't thought about construction schedules or material costs once since we got here. When's the last time you took a real vacation? Never. Clarissa always said we needed to save money for the future. The house, kids, retirement. There was always something more important than enjoying the present. Genevieve raised her wine glass. To the present, then, and to making sure the people who screwed us over get exactly what they deserve. We clinked glasses as my phone buzzed with another notification. This time it wasn't a social media alert or a concerned friend. It was a text from an unknown number. Kyle, this is Clarissa. We need to talk. What you're doing is humiliating and childish. Come home so we can work this out like adults. I showed the message to Genevieve, who read it and started laughing. What's so funny? She's scared. Really genuinely scared. Look at the language. We need to talk. Work this out. That's not someone who's confident in their position. That's someone who's realized they made a massive mistake. So what do? We ignore her completely. Radio silence. The worst thing you can do to someone who's trying to control the narrative is refuse to participate in their story. But the messages kept coming. Trent Collins sent a rambling email about misunderstandings and temporary arrangements. Mark Reddick called Genevieve 16 times, leaving increasingly angry voicemails. Even Stephanie, the maid of honor, reached out with offers to mediate the situation. They're all talking to each other, Genevieve observed on our 4th day. Coordinating their responses, trying to figure out damage control. That's good news for us. How is that good news? Because it means they're not running. If they were really confident in their fraud scheme, they'd be on a beach in the Cayman Islands by now. Instead, they're still in the Midwest, trying to manage a public relations crisis. She was right. According to Eddie's text, Clarissa was staying at her mother's house. Trent was still showing up at his insurance office every day. Mark was conducting business as usual at Midwest Construction. None of them had disappeared. They think they can weather this, I realized. They think if they act normal long enough, the attention will die down and they can go back to their fraud scheme. Exactly, which means we need to make sure the attention doesn't die down. On our last night in Barbados, Genevieve and I sat on the beach with a bottle of champagne, planning our next move. The stars were brilliant in the clear Caribbean sky, and the sound of waves provided a perfect soundtrack for conspiracy. When we get back, everything changes, she said. Are you ready for that? What do you mean? I mean, Mark is going to fire you. Clarissa is going to try to take you for everything you're worth in the divorce. Your friends are going to choose sides, and most of them won't choose yours. Are you prepared for that level of social warfare? I thought about it, really thought about it. A week ago, I'd been a construction project manager with a predictable life and a fiancé who seemed perfect on paper. Now I was sitting on a beach with a woman who was smarter than anyone I'd ever met, planning revenge against people who'd stolen my money and humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. Yeah, I said finally, I'm ready. Good, because tomorrow we go home and burn their world down. The flight back to Chicago felt like a descent into enemy territory. Genevieve and I had spent 5 days in paradise while our abandoned spouses presumably plotted damage control. Now we were returning to face whatever shitstorm they'd prepared in our absence. Eddie picked me up at O'Hare in his pickup truck, and the look on his face told me everything I needed to know about the reception waiting for me at home. "Dude, you have no idea what's been happening here," he said as we pulled out of the airport. "It's like someone dropped a nuclear bomb on your social circle." Good or bad nuclear bomb? Depends on your perspective. The guys from work think you're either a genius or completely insane. The wives are split between thinking you're a cheating bastard or a romantic hero. And everyone wants to know what really happened at the reception. We drove through familiar neighborhoods that suddenly felt foreign. Strip malls and subdivisions that I'd seen 1,000 times looked different somehow, like I was viewing them through new eyes. "What about Clarissa? And Trent?" Eddie's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "That's where it gets interesting. Clarissa's been telling everyone that you abandoned her at the altar, that she left the reception because she was heartbroken and confused. She's playing the victim card hard. And people believe that? Some do. But here's the thing. Stephanie Walsh has been drinking at Murphy's Tavern every night since you left, and she's been talking. A lot." Murphy's Tavern was the local dive bar where everyone from our social circle ended up eventually. If Stephanie was talking there, it meant the gossip was spreading through our community like wildfire. What's she saying? That Clarissa and Trent have been hooking up for months, that the whole wedding was some kind of setup. She's not making much sense, but people are listening. We pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex. The building looked exactly the same, but I felt like a different person walking through the front door. My mailbox was stuffed with bills, legal notices, and what looked like a formal letter from Midwest Construction. My termination notice. Effective immediately for conduct detrimental to company values and reputation. Mark Reddick's signature was at the bottom, along with a note that my final paycheck would be withheld pending review of recent project expenses. "They move fast," I said, showing the letter to Eddie. "Mark's been in full damage control mode since the photos from Barbados went viral. He's telling everyone that you seduced his wife, that the whole thing was planned." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Planned? I found out my wife was a criminal 3 hours after she disappeared from our wedding." "Yeah, well, that's not the story they're telling." My apartment felt like a museum of my old life. Wedding gifts were still stacked in the living room, unopened. Clarissa's clothes hung in the closet. Her toothbrush sat in the bathroom holder next to mine. I started packing her stuff into boxes. Dresses, shoes, jewelry, all the expensive things she'd accumulated over 3 years of dating and engagement. It felt therapeutic, like I was literally boxing up the lies and preparing to ship them back where they belonged. My phone rang. Genevieve. "How's the homecoming?" she asked. "I got fired. You?" Mark changed the locks on the house. "I'm staying at the Marriott downtown." Her voice was calm, matter of fact. "But I have good news. I spent the morning with FBI agent Sarah Chen. They're very interested in our evidence." "The FBI?" "Insurance fraud across state lines is a federal crime, Kyle, especially when it involves construction contracts and municipal projects. Mark's been using federal infrastructure money to launder Clarissa and Trent's stolen insurance payouts." The scope of what they'd been doing was starting to hit me. This wasn't just a cheating wife and her ex-boyfriend. This was organized crime involving my employer, federal contracts, and millions of dollars. What happens now? Now we wait for them to make their next mistake, which, knowing these people, won't take long. She was right. The mistake came that evening, in the form of Trent Collins showing up at my apartment door at 9 p.m. with a bottle of expensive whiskey and what he probably thought was a charming smile. "Kyle, good to see you, buddy. Heard you just got back from the islands. How was the trip?" I stared at him through the screen door. Trent was wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his BMW was parked in my visitor's spot like he owned the place. "What do you want, Trent?" "Just wanted to clear the air, you know? There's been a lot of misunderstanding lately, and I think we can work everything out like reasonable men." "Misunderstanding?" I opened the door and let him in, mostly because I wanted to hear whatever bullshit story he'd prepared. "Is that what we're calling it?" He set the whiskey bottle on my kitchen counter and looked around the apartment like he was appraising it for sale. "Look, Kyle, I know how this looks. Clarissa and I have history, and maybe we got caught up in old feelings at your reception. But it's not what you think." "What do I think, Trent?" "That we're having an affair. That we planned this whole thing. But the truth is, Clarissa called me because she was having cold feet about the marriage. She needed someone to talk to, someone who knew her before all this wedding pressure." I opened the whiskey bottle and poured 2 glasses. The liquor was smooth, expensive, probably bought with stolen insurance money. So you're saying my wife disappeared from our wedding reception because she needed relationship counseling? Exactly. And when she realized how it looked, she panicked. She's been staying with her mother, trying to figure out how to apologize, how to make things right. And what about the insurance fraud? Trent's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. For just a second, his polished salesman facade cracked, and I saw something ugly underneath. I'm sorry, what? The insurance fraud, Trent. The fake claims, the inflated payouts, the money laundering through construction contracts. What about that? He set his glass down carefully and straightened his tie. Kyle, I think you've been listening to some very unreliable sources. Maybe spending time with certain people has given you the wrong impression about legitimate business practices. Certain people, meaning Genevieve Reddick? Genevieve is a bitter woman going through a messy divorce. She's making wild accusations to hurt her husband's business. You're just collateral damage. I finished my whiskey and set the glass down harder than necessary. Get out. Kyle, be reasonable. Get out of my apartment, Trent, and tell Clarissa that if she wants to talk, she can do it through lawyers. After he left, I called Genevieve and told her about the conversation. She listened without interruption, then was quiet for a long moment. They're scared, she said finally. Really genuinely terrified. Trent wouldn't have come to you unless they were desperate to control the narrative. So what's our next move? Tomorrow night, Murphy's Tavern. Time to hear what Stephanie Walsh has really been saying. Murphy's Tavern on a Thursday night was exactly what you'd expect from a dive bar in suburban Illinois. Dim lighting, sticky floors, and the kind of regulars who knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. Stephanie Walsh was holding court at the end of the bar, 3 drinks deep and ready to tell anyone who'd listen about the scandal of the century. I walked in alone. Genevieve was waiting in her car outside, ready to document whatever happened next. The plan was simple. Let Stephanie talk, record everything, and see how deep this rabbit hole really went. Kyle! Stephanie's voice carried across the entire bar. Look who's back from paradise. How was the honeymoon, sweetie? Every conversation in the place stopped. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me as I walked to the bar and ordered a beer. The bartender, a guy named Tommy, who'd been serving drinks here for 15 years, gave me a sympathetic nod. Heard you had some excitement while you were gone, Tommy said, sliding a bottle across the bar. You could say that. I took a long drink and turned to face Stephanie. I heard you've been sharing some interesting stories about my wedding. Oh, honey, I've been trying to set the record straight. People have been saying terrible things about you, and I just can't stand it. Stephanie was drunk enough to be dangerous, but sober enough to think she was clever. She patted the bar stool next to her, and I sat down, pulling out my phone and setting it on the bar like I was checking messages. The recording app was already running. What kind of terrible things? That you planned the whole thing. That you knew Clarissa was going to leave and you set up that trip with Genevieve Reddick as some kind of revenge plot. Which is ridiculous, because I know for a fact that Clarissa and Trent have been planning this for months. Planning what for months? Stephanie leaned closer, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a whisper, but was actually loud enough for half the bar to hear. The insurance thing, Kyle. The money they've been stealing. Clarissa told me everything. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice casual. What did she tell you? About the fake claims. About how Trent taught her which cases to approve and which ones to flag for investigation. About how they've been splitting the money with that construction company. She took another drink. Your boss Mark has been helping them launder everything through fake contracts. When did she tell you this? 3 weeks ago, right after her bachelorette party. She was drunk and scared and talking about how she couldn't go through with the wedding because you'd figure it out eventually. Stephanie's eyes were bright with the thrill of sharing secrets. She said Trent promised they could disappear after the reception, make it look like cold feet instead of theft. The pieces were falling into place like dominoes. The wedding hadn't been about love or commitment, it had been Clarissa's exit strategy. Marry me, disappear with Trent during the reception, let everyone assume she'd panicked about marriage instead of fleeing from federal crimes. So why didn't they disappear? I asked. Because of those photos you posted from Barbados. Suddenly everyone was watching, asking questions. They couldn't just vanish without making it worse. I bought Stephanie another drink and let her talk. Over the next hour, she laid out the entire conspiracy. Clarissa had been approving fraudulent insurance claims for 2 years, splitting the money with Trent's network of fake claimants. Mark Reddick had been laundering the proceeds through inflated construction contracts, using federal infrastructure projects to legitimize stolen money. The plan had been simple. Disappear after the wedding. let people assume Clarissa had cold feet, and resurface in 6 months as a couple who'd reconnected after her mistake. By then, they'd have enough clean money to start over somewhere else. But now they're stuck, Stephanie continued. Clarissa's at her mother's house, crying every day about how everything went wrong. Trent's talking about cutting his losses and running. And Mark Reddick is furious because the FBI started asking questions about his contracts. The FBI is investigating? Since Tuesday, Genevieve Reddick walked into their office with boxes of evidence, bank records, email printouts, photographs of fake damage claims. She's been building a case for months. I finished my beer and stood up. Stephanie, thanks for clearing things up. Kyle, wait! She grabbed my arm. What are you going to do? Whatever I have to do. Outside, Genevieve was waiting in her Mercedes, engine running. I got in and played back the recording on my phone. Her eyes got wider with each revelation. Jesus Christ, she said when it finished. She just confessed to knowledge of federal crimes, in a public place, while drunk. What does that mean for us? It means we have enough evidence to destroy all of them. But Kyle, once we turn this over to the FBI, there's no going back. Clarissa will go to prison, Trent will go to prison, my husband will go to prison. I thought about that for a moment. 3 days ago, these people had been my wife, my boss, and a guy I barely tolerated at social gatherings. Now they were criminals who'd stolen millions of dollars and tried to use me as cover for their escape plan. Good, I said. Let them burn. We drove to the FBI field office downtown. Agent Sarah Chen was waiting for us, along with 2 other agents and a federal prosecutor. They listened to Stephanie's recording, reviewed Genevieve's evidence, and asked detailed questions about timelines and relationships. We'll need you both to testify when this goes to trial, Agent Chen said. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? What kind of scrutiny? I asked. Your personal relationship will be examined in detail. Defense attorneys will claim you conspired to frame their clients out of revenge. Your finances, your communications, your travel records, everything will be fair game. Genevieve and I looked at each other. We'd crossed a line in Barbados, moved from allies of convenience to something deeper. The photos we'd posted weren't just revenge anymore. They were documentation of a real relationship that had grown out of shared betrayal. We're prepared, Genevieve said. Good, because tomorrow morning we're executing search warrants on Consolidated Insurance, Midwest Construction, and the residences of all 3 suspects. This is going to be front-page news by noon. Agent Chen was right. By Thursday morning, every news outlet in the Midwest was covering the story. Wedding day fraud scheme exposed, bride and groom arrested in multi-million-dollar scam, FBI raids local businesses and insurance fraud investigation. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, former friends, distant relatives who wanted the inside story. I ignored most of them, but I answered when Eddie called. Dude, are you watching the news? Hard to miss it. They arrested Clarissa at her mother's house this morning. Perp walk and everything. Mrs. Lane was screaming at the reporters about how you set up her innocent daughter. I turned on the television and saw footage of Clarissa in handcuffs, being led to a federal marshal's van. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her usual polish and confidence. For a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. Then I remembered the wedding reception, the lies, the stolen money, and the feeling past. What about Trent and Mark? Trent tried to run. They caught him at O'Hare with a suitcase full of cash and a one-way ticket to Costa Rica. Mark's claiming he's innocent, that he had no idea about the fraud scheme. Will that work? Not according to the news. They found emails on his computer detailing the money laundering operation. Looks like he was keeping records of everything. That afternoon, Genevieve and I met with a team of federal prosecutors to discuss our testimony and the evidence we'd provided. The case was solid. Financial records, recorded confessions, documented patterns of fraud spanning 2 years. How long will they go to prison? I asked. Conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, theft of federal funds. We're looking at 15 to 20 years each if they're convicted on all counts, the prosecutor said. Your wife and Mr. Collins might get reduced sentences if they cooperate and testify against Mr. Reddick. What about restitution? The court will order them to repay everything they stole, plus penalties and interest. But realistically, most of the money is gone. You'll recover some assets through civil forfeiture, but don't expect to get rich from this. I didn't care about getting rich. I cared about justice, about consequences, about making sure that people who thought they were smarter than everyone else learned otherwise. That evening, Genevieve and I had dinner at a restaurant downtown, away from the suburban social circle that had defined our old lives. We talked about the future, about what came next after the trials and the headlines faded. I'm thinking about leaving Chicago, she said over wine. Starting over somewhere new, maybe the West Coast. What would you do? Forensic accounting, consulting work. Help other people who've been screwed over by financial fraud. She smiled. Turns out I'm good at this investigative stuff. What about us? What about us, Kyle? We're two people who found each other in the middle of the worst situations of our lives. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. I thought about that as we walked back to her hotel. 6 months ago, I'd been planning a future with a woman who was stealing money and planning to abandon me. Now I was falling in love with someone who'd helped me expose the truth and get justice. Genevieve? Yeah? When you move to the West Coast, you're going to need someone to help you relocate. Someone who knows construction, project management, that kind of thing. She stopped walking and turned to face me. Are you applying for the job? Depends on the benefits package. She kissed me right there on the sidewalk, under the streetlights of downtown Chicago, while our old lives burned down around us and our new life began. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse watching my ex-wife's defense attorney make his closing argument. Clarissa had lost 30 pounds during her time in county jail, and the orange jumpsuit made her look like a stranger wearing a familiar face. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the lawyer said, my client is not a criminal mastermind. She's a victim of manipulation by older, more experienced men who took advantage of her trust and inexperience. I almost laughed out loud. Clarissa Lane was many things, but naive wasn't one of them. The woman who'd spent 3 years planning our wedding down to the napkin colors wasn't someone who got tricked into federal crimes. Genevieve sat beside me in the gallery, taking notes for the consulting business she'd started in San Francisco. We'd been living together in a converted warehouse in the Mission District, and I'd been working for a green construction company that specialized in sustainable housing projects. Our life was smaller than what we'd had before, but it was real in a way that our old lives had never been. The prosecution wants you to believe that Ms. Lane was an equal partner in this conspiracy, the defense attorney continued, but the evidence shows a young woman who was pressured into approving claims by her supervisor, who was manipulated by a boyfriend who promised her a better life. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Walsh, stood up for her rebuttal. She'd been methodical and devastating throughout the trial, laying out the fraud scheme with the precision of a surgeon. Mr. Collins was not Ms. Lane's supervisor, Walsh said. He worked for a completely different company. Ms. Lane approved fraudulent claims because she was paid to approve fraudulent claims. She kept detailed records of her criminal activity. She planned to flee the country with the proceeds of her crimes. Walsh clicked a remote, and the courtroom screens filled with bank records showing regular deposits from Trent Collins to Clarissa's personal account. $200,000 over 18 months, always in amounts just under the federal reporting threshold. This is not the behavior of a victim, Walsh continued. This is the behavior of a criminal who thought she was too smart to get caught. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, theft of federal funds. The same verdict they delivered for Trent Collins 2 weeks earlier, and for Mark Reddick a month before that. Clarissa's mother sobbed in the front row. Clarissa herself showed no emotion, just stared straight ahead as the judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Genevieve and me. We'd become minor celebrities in the true crime community, the couple who'd exposed $1 million fraud scheme and found love in the process. Netflix was developing a documentary series about the case. Mr. Foster, how do you feel about your ex-wife's conviction? A reporter asked. I feel like justice was served, I said. People who steal money and betray trust should face consequences for their actions. Ms. Reddick, what's next for you and Mr. Foster? Genevieve smiled the way she always did when she was about to say something that would end up in headlines. We're getting married next month. Small ceremony, close friends only, and definitely no insurance adjusters on the guest list. The reporters laughed, and we walked away hand in hand. Our car was parked 2 blocks away, and we took our time getting there, enjoying the Chicago summer evening and the feeling of a chapter finally closing. Do you think she'll appeal? Genevieve asked. Probably, but it won't matter. The evidence was overwhelming, and federal fraud convictions are hard to overturn. Any regrets? I thought about that question seriously. A year ago, I'd been engaged to a beautiful woman, working for a successful company, living what looked like a perfect suburban life. Now my ex-wife was going to federal prison, my former boss was serving 15 years for money laundering, and I was starting over in a new city with a new career. None, I said, not a single one. The sentencing hearing was held on a Thursday morning in late September. Judge Patricia Morrison had a reputation for tough sentences in financial crimes cases, and she didn't disappoint. Ms. Lane, you violated the trust placed in you by your employer, your clients, and the federal government, she said from the bench. You stole money from people who had suffered genuine losses, and you corrupted the insurance system that honest people depend on for security. Clarissa stood at the defendant's table in a navy blue suit that her mother had bought for the occasion. She'd written a letter to the court expressing remorse and asking for mercy, but Judge Morrison wasn't impressed. The court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $1.2 million, plus interest and penalties. 12 years. Clarissa would be 44 when she got out, assuming she served the full sentence. Trent Collins had gotten 15 years. Mark Reddick got 20 because of his leadership role and the federal contracts involved. After the hearing, I walked outside and called Eddie from the courthouse steps. "It's over," I said. 12 years for Clarissa, and the restitution order means we'll recover about half of what they stole. "How do you feel, man?" "Like I can finally move on." That evening, Genevieve and I had dinner at our favorite restaurant in San Francisco's Mission District. The place was loud and crowded, full of tech workers and artists and people building new lives in a city that rewarded innovation over tradition. "So what now?" she asked over wine. "We've gotten justice, we've started over, we've built something real together. What's the next chapter?" I pulled a small velvet box from my jacket pocket and set it on the table between us. "I was hoping you could help me figure that out." She opened the box and stared at the ring inside. It wasn't huge or flashy. I couldn't afford huge and flashy, but it was perfect for her. Simple, elegant, honest. "Kyle Foster, are you proposing to me in a taco restaurant?" "I'm proposing to you in the place where we had our first real date, the place where we decided to stop running from our old lives and start building a new one." She put on the ring and held up her hand to catch the light. "Yes, obviously yes. But I have one condition." "What's that?" "No insurance adjusters at the wedding. Ever, for any reason." "Deal." We kissed across the table while mariachi music played and other diners applauded. It was nothing like the wedding I'd planned with Clarissa. No ice sculptures or string quartets or $8,000 dresses. It was better because it was real. 6 weeks later, we got married in Golden Gate Park with 20 friends and family members in attendance. Eddie flew out from Chicago to be my best man. Genevieve's sister came from Portland to be her maid of honor. We exchanged vows under a eucalyptus tree while fog rolled in from the Pacific Ocean. The reception was at a brewery in the Castro, with local beer and food trucks and a playlist we'd made together. No cake-cutting ceremony, no formal dances, no elaborate traditions that looked good in photos but felt hollow in real life. Just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their old lives, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about their happiness. As the evening wound down, Genevieve and I stepped outside for air. The city spread out below us, millions of lights representing millions of stories, millions of people trying to build something meaningful in an uncertain world. "Any regrets now?" she asked. "About what?" "About the way everything happened, the scandal, the trials, the headlines. We could have handled things quietly, through lawyers and private investigators. Instead, we burned everything down very publicly." I thought about Clarissa in federal prison, about Trent Collins learning that actions have consequences, about Mark Reddick discovering that stealing from the government was a career-limiting move. "No regrets," I said. "They made their choices. We made ours. And our choices led us here." Here was a new city, new careers, new friends who didn't know or care about our past scandals. Here was a relationship built on honesty instead of lies, trust instead of manipulation, genuine affection instead of social convenience. Here was exactly where we belonged. 3 years later, we got a letter from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Clarissa Lane was requesting to add us to her approved correspondence list. She wanted to apologize, to explain her actions, to ask for our forgiveness. Genevieve and I read the letter together over coffee in our kitchen, which overlooked San Francisco Bay. We'd bought a house in Sausalito, and I was running my own sustainable construction company. Genevieve's forensic accounting firm had helped recover over $50 million in fraud cases across the West Coast. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think some bridges are meant to stay burned," I said. We threw the letter away without responding. Some stories don't need epilogues. Some people don't deserve second chances. Some mistakes are too big to forgive, even with time and distance and new perspectives. Instead, we finished our coffee and got ready for work. We had projects to complete, clients to help, a life to build together. The past was the past, and the future was whatever we chose to make it. That seemed like justice enough.